Welcome back. Indian Point, the nuclear power plant located in Buchanan, New York, in New York's Hudson Valley, has long been considered controversial. Its proximity to New York City and the high population density surrounding the plant, more than any in this country, make its location, well, let's just say less than ideal. A new report shows that in the worst case scenario, a snowy Wednesday, let's say in February, it would take only 5.5 hours to clear practically everybody living within the plant's emergency zone. But that estimate is certainly rife with, let's say, debate. First, the emergency zone in the report is just a 10-mile radius around the plant. According to the report, approximately 310,000 residents would live in that zone. But during the Fukushima Daiichi accident in Japan, our own embassy there, the U.S. Embassy, advised American citizens to evacuate all areas within 50 miles. Now, this is what a 50-mile evacuation zone would look like. And we go from 300,000 plus people to 20 million people. Additionally, it appears that the plan doesn't quite take human nature into account. The plan says that if all of the 255 schools and daycare centers in the zone are in session, there are enough buses to take all the kids to safety. But what happens when panic, or some cynics would say reality, sets in? The last time we investigated this issue several years ago, the bus drivers that we spoke to, that were within the 10-mile radius, by the way, said that they'd be unlikely to fulfill the duties called upon them.
If it was really bad, I wouldn't do it, basically. I wouldn't. I'd feel sorry for people that were involved in it, and I'd probably stay away from it.
If it was really bad, I probably wouldn't go.
A lot of bus drivers told us that they'd go directly for their own kids. And a lot of school administrators we spoke to at the time weren't even aware of what the plan actually was. Now, let's assume things have gotten better in the interregnum and that there's actually a coherent plan that all parties involved know where they're supposed to go. There still is, as we said, the human element. And then finally we get to the point that the plan also calls for approximately 30 police officers to drive more than 2,200 miles of roads to make sure that residents have in fact left. So does this really work here? And when you consider the byways and roadways of the area that we're talking about, sometimes it gets jammed up just during a regular rush hour day. But let's bring in our guest who can help us with that. Phillip Musegass. Let me say it, help me. Musegass.
Yeah, thank you.
I had it before, darn it. He's the Hudson River Program Director at Riverkeeper, and he's been a very outspoken critic of Indian Point and has been involved in the preparations of the organization's legal challenge to the license renewal of Indian Point. We'll talk about that more in a minute. I know the folks at Energy. I believe they're far more improved than their predecessors in terms of proprietors of the plant. But I've always taken issue with, of all the things at the plant, to evacuate that plant from where it's based, it just can't be done. Forget about 5 hours. I give them 8 hours or so. There's just too many moving parts and too many variables in human nature. You agree?
Absolutely agree. I mean, Riverkeeper has been raising concerns about the emergency evacuation plan since 9/11, when we really took a look at the safety surrounding the plan and the emergency planning, and it just will not work. I mean, the state of New York commissioned an independent study of this back in 2003 that found that the plan wouldn't work. If you look at the basic facts, whether you're pro-nuclear or not, or pro or anti-nuclear, look at the basic facts, and you look at this recent study that Entergy commissioned on the evacuation times. The first thing I noticed when I started reading this study was that they don't look at evacuation times during rush hour.
And
they ignore rush hour.
Number, just as you use the number of 310,000, Philip, that doesn't take into account people who work here, right? That's just residents. It's not people who come and work in this building, for example. It's just people who have homes, for example, in the area.
Exactly. They basically assume that everyone is going to be home either in the middle of the day or in the evening, and they're all going to be leaving their homes in an orderly fashion. And only the people in these wedge areas that they tell to evacuate are the only ones that are going to evacuate. So in this scenario that they're in these assumptions they're using, if you live 3 miles from the plant, but you're on the south side and they're only evacuating people on the north side, they think that you're going to stay put, even though you know there's an out of control emergency going on.
I'm going to go a limb and say that's not going to happen. People aren't going to
happen. And not only in the 10-mile zone. I mean, we have, as we've seen since Fukushima and the nuclear disaster in Japan, this idea that we only have to plan for a radiation disaster in 10 miles is a complete fantasy. There are places 50, 60 miles away from Fukushima that are permanently contaminated with radiation. So,
and again, our own NRC told the folks in Japan at the time to get well beyond that immediate radius.
Exactly.
I'm going to go around the table, bring in everybody as it relates to the relicensing here, but to say it's a conflicted picture is putting it politely, and without boring everybody with the details, the way it's really going to work is it doesn't matter what residents in the county have to say, it doesn't matter what the governor has to say, it matters what folks in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania have to say at the NRC. That's how it's going to work. Do you see any practical rationale why that organization, which is very wedded to the industry and made up of industry folks, is going to set a precedent and shut down this plant and basically send a message to everybody else that, you know what, don't worry about Buchanan, New York, it doesn't apply to you. They'd be basically waving a big red flag here at the very time they're trying to build more plants, not shutter down others.
Well, I think the two things are going on, and two factors are at play here. One, we have not seen a unified front by our elected officials in New York really putting pressure on the NRC to do something different about Indian Point.
But could they? I mean, I've had every stakeholder at this table, from Congresswoman Lowy to all the other electeds. I've had the Attorney General. I've talked to the governor. They all say that they want to shut the thing down, but they can't do anything other than have a lawsuit over the water, I guess. But they can't force the NRC to do anything.
They can't technically force them. I mean, the best leverage for closing the plant in terms of the relicensing case are the state permits. Although the state of New York and the Attorney General and Riverkeeper have put on what we think is an excellent case against relicensing with the NRC. Their history is to support the industry at any cost. But you know, the only chance in terms of the evacuation plan, and it's important for people to understand that the evacuation planning and all the concerns people have about a disaster here, none of that can be raised in the relicensing case.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, there's no opportunity for the public to raise concerns about evacuation planning in any situation. It's completely separate.
I know
from,
people don't want to hear
public
it because it feels like white noise to them, but the whole process is just ridiculous. And Dave, I got to ask you, because this obviously it came to the nation's attention when the jets that literally went into the Twin Towers flew right over the containment domes of Indian Point. When your old boss was in Albany, it was still a controversial issue here. You know, did you guys think this was really feasibly evacuable?
That's a good question. And at that time, I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I really focused on it that much. I know that we did commission a study in 2003 that I think Watt, actually, his group.
James Lee Witt.
Yeah, James Lee Witt, thank you. Yeah, sure. Right one. Watt, Witt. Actually makes a big difference.
Yes,
You go back far enough.
It's a tough one. You know, I mean, it really is a tough one. Does it look like on its face that it makes sense? No. I mean, you know, I think that we'd be kidding ourselves. But I think from the other side of it, we don't have a coherent energy policy in this state to be able to take a facility like this offline.
You know, the tough question is,
it doesn't exist.
if you said definitively, we can't evacuate the thing, then what? And that's the most fascinating thing. If you made an empirical statement, they said there's no way to get everybody out, that wouldn't even be in the relicensing conversation, right? You wouldn't even be able to have comments on it, and we then would have to make that decision. I don't know, Andrew, we've approached this subject, you and I, at this table 1,000 times here, and at the end of the day, even after Fukushima, right? I don't know that there's enough pressures to really change the status quo.
Well, first of all, on the evacuation plan, you and I, either we live in the evacuation zone or dangerous close to the edge of it. Dominic, on the other side of the river, same thing. And just, you know, rush hour traffic, you know that there's no, I mean, if there's a sale at Macy's at the Palisades Mall, you can't evacuate Westchester County in 3 hours. So I don't think there's any realism to the evacuation plan whatsoever. But no, it doesn't impact relicensing, and I don't think there's anything short of President Obama reversing his policy on nuclear power and saying he wants to stop it that would stop Indian Point from being relicensed.
You know, Richard, I live the other side of the river argument. I don't even know if I'm within the 10-mile radius. And if I'm not, I live in Pomona in Rockland County. And if I'm not, it can't be no more than maybe 20, 30 miles. You know, but I would venture to say that most people where I live at don't even know about this plant, number one. Number two, an evacuation plan. Number three, we can't get over the Tappan Zee Bridge during morning rush hour in under 2-3 hours. And that's with the expanded lanes. So imagine an emergency where everyone, life or death, is trying to make it over. It's just not going to happen.
We would know, they would know, they absolutely would know if this plant wasn't on. I mean, how much would their power be? Would they be able to get power?
Although I would only say the only argument about that is, and too much of these are on auto replay. But the plant did shut down for 9 months, and people saw their energy bills go up, what, 10 cents a month or whatever? It was so negligible. We actually have some precedents when when the thing got red flagged and they shut down, I think 2 and 3, whatever, for, like I said, almost a year.
They were shut down for about a year.
Yeah.
But that was a planned shutdown.
Yeah, I mean, listen,
Yeah,
you're
but the
right
energy
that we have energy
it has
concerns,
changed quite a bit.
and some of the people who say they want clean energy, right? There's a conflict with this. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but it's just an insult to the intelligence of people to say, yeah, this thing could work 5 hours, please. And you talk to the people who would have to do the evacuations. I bet you, I don't want to be right here. I bet you they still don't know where they're supposed to go. It just. That's the only part to me, Philip, that just drives me nuts.
If you look at the evacuation plans, it's exactly what you said. Their plan, this is like the worst example of bureaucratic planning, because their plan is, the 10-mile zone is divided up into 45, I think, different numbered little mini zones. And so they expect that people know which little numbered zone they're in. So if you're sitting at home and the sirens go on,
town the plan
right, you don't even know where the edge is. So it says, you know,
I really don't. I really don't.
so
You didn't have to agree with me.
I mean, they come on the radio and say everyone in zone EE0042B needs to evacuate.
At that point, he goes 0 to 80 in 3 seconds.
You're on the right, but so is everybody else.
Is that
right?
why when I'm in the
It makes
middle of
no
a good
sense.
television show, they interrupt my television show? And
Dominic, let me just save you time. Get your wetsuit on. Get ready to jump in the Hudson to beat the cars going over the TZ.
It ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, you ain't gonna make it the other side. Philip, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're suitably even more depressed than we began this conversation.
Sorry to be the bearer of
please.
bad news.
Hey, it is what it is. Now keep this conversation going online, everyone, and head over to Facebook and Twitter to sound off. Is 5 hours a realistic evacuation time for Indian Point and its environs? And I'm going to mark my answer as no. All right, when we come back, we'll talk real politics. Please stay with us.